They said he'd turned them in for the bounty, that no one with sense would shelter runaways when bloodhounds were closing in. But when the twin girls stumbled onto his porch in the dead of night, shaking and hollow-eyed, the Comanche hunter didn't reach for coin, he reached for his rifle, looked into the darkness where their hunters prowled, and said one word that changed everything: stay. The forest had no mercy that night. The cold bit through skin and settled into bone, turning breath into fog and hope into something fragile. Two small figures moved through the underbrush like wounded animals, their feet bare and bleeding, their dresses torn and mud-caked. Lucy held her sister's hand so tightly their fingers had gone numb, but she wouldn't let go. She couldn't. Anna stumbled again, her knee hitting a root, and Lucy caught her before she could cry out. They had learned silence the hard way, learned that even a whimper could bring the dogs closer, could bring the men with their torches and their iron will. The girls were 11 years old, identical twins with pale faces and dark hair that hung in tangled knots down their backs. Their eyes, once bright with childhood, now carried the weight of something far older. Behind them, distant but growing, came the baying of hounds. The sound cut through the night like a blade, sharp and relentless. Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled Anna forward, ignoring the sting of thorns against her legs, the ache in her lungs. They had been running for 3 days, stealing through the woods like ghosts, drinking from streams, eating nothing but the few berries they dared to pick. Their father was dead. Their mother had vanished into the night 2 years prior, leaving them with a man who wore the title of uncle but carried the soul of a devil. He had worked them like mules, beaten them when they slowed, locked them in the cellar when they wept. And when Lucy had seen him raise the iron poker toward Anna's face, something inside her had snapped. She had grabbed Anna's hand, and they had run. No plan, no direction, just the instinct to survive. And now the men her uncle had hired were hunting them down like rabbits, determined to drag them back to that house of horrors. The bounty on their heads wasn't large, but it was enough. Enough to make men cruel. The trees began to thin ahead, and Lucy's heart sank. Open ground meant exposure, meant the dogs would close the distance. But they had no choice. She pulled Anna forward, and they broke through the tree line into a small clearing. A cabin stood in the center, humble and weathered, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin gray line. Lucy hesitated. Every door they'd passed in 3 days had been a gamble. Knock and you might find kindness. Knock and you might find a rifle barrel. Knock and you might find someone who'd sell you back to hell for a handful of coins. But the hounds were closer now, their voices rising in excited pitch. The men would be right behind them. She pulled Anna toward the porch, their feet barely making sound against the dirt. The cabin was small, built from rough-hewn logs, its windows dark except for the faint glow of firelight within. A single rocking chair sat on the porch, unmoving. Lucy's hand shook as she raised it to knock, but before her knuckles could touch wood, the door swung open. A man stood in the doorway. Tall and broad-shouldered, his skin the deep bronze of someone who had lived under the sun all his life. His hair was black and long, tied back with a strip of leather, and his eyes were dark, unreadable. He wore simple buckskin clothing, and in his hands he held a rifle, not aimed but ready. For a moment, no one moved. Lucy's voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "Please," she said, and the word carried everything. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the desperation of 3 days running. "They'll hunt us down." Anna pressed against her side, trembling, her face streaked with dirt and tears. The man's gaze moved from Lucy to Anna, then past them into the darkness beyond. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He stepped aside, his voice low and steady. "Inside, now." Lucy didn't wait. She pulled Anna through the door, and the warmth of the cabin hit them like a wall. The man closed the door behind them, sliding a heavy wooden bar into place. He moved to the window, peering out into the night. The girls stood in the center of the room, shivering, unsure whether they had just been saved or trapped. The cabin was sparse but clean. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. A simple table, 2 chairs, a bed in the corner. Furs and hides hung from hooks, and the smell of smoked meat lingered in the air. The man turned to face them, his rifle still in hand. His eyes studied them carefully, not with suspicion, but with a sharp awareness, the kind that missed nothing. "How many are following you?" he asked. His voice was deep, quiet, but it carried authority. Lucy swallowed hard. 4 men. Maybe 5. And dogs. Her voice cracked on the last word. The man nodded once, as though this confirmed something he already knew. He moved to a corner of the room and pulled a heavy bearskin from a peg, draping it over Anna's shoulders. Then he did the same for Lucy. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs near the fire. The girls obeyed, their legs barely holding them up. The warmth from the hearth was almost painful against their frozen skin. The man crouched by the fire, adding another log, then stood and moved to a shelf. He brought down a clay pot and 2 wooden bowls, ladling something thick and steaming into them. He set the bowls in front of the girls without a word. It was stew, rich with meat and wild roots, the smell of it making Lucy's stomach clench with hunger. She looked up at the man, searching his face for some sign of what he wanted in return. But his expression gave nothing away. "Eat," he said simply. Anna didn't wait. She grabbed the bowl with both hands and drank straight from it, her eyes closing as the warmth spread through her. Lucy hesitated a moment longer, then followed. The food was the best thing she'd ever tasted, not because it was fine, but because it was real, because it was given without cruelty. The man watched them for a moment, then turned back to the window. He stood there in silence, his rifle resting against his shoulder, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. Minutes passed. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft scrape of wooden bowls against the table. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of voices. Men's voices, rough and calling to one another. The baying of the hounds grew louder, closer. Lucy's hands froze on her bowl. Anna's eyes went wide with terror. The man at the window didn't move. The voices drew nearer. Lucy could hear them now, clear enough to make out words. "They came this way, I'm sure of it." Another voice, gruffer, answered. "Tracks lead right through here. Check every cabin. I want those girls found before dawn." Lucy's breath came in shallow gasps. She looked at the man, waiting for him to turn, to tell them to hide, to run, to do something. But he remained still, his back to them, his posture calm. The hounds barked louder now, and then came the sound of footsteps on the porch. A heavy knock rattled the door. "Open up, we're tracking runaways." The man finally moved. He walked to the door slowly, deliberately, and lifted the bar. Lucy's heart nearly stopped. He was going to give them up. He was going to hand them over. She reached for Anna's hand, squeezing it tight. The door swung open, and 4 men stood on the porch, torches in hand, their faces hard and weathered. The lead man was tall and broad, his beard streaked with gray, his eyes cold. Behind him, 2 hounds strained at their leashes, their noses to the ground. The man in the doorway stepped out, pulling the door mostly closed behind him, blocking their view inside. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice flat. The lead hunter's eyes narrowed. "We're tracking 2 runaway girls, twins, about this tall." He gestured with his hand. "Came through here not 10 minutes ago. You see them?" The man shook his head. "No." The hunter's gaze didn't waver. "You sure about that?" "Dogs say otherwise." He gestured to the hounds, which were pulling toward the cabin door, their barking frantic. The man looked down at the dogs, then back at the hunter. "Dogs smell my supper," he said evenly. "Fresh venison. I don't have your girls." The hunter stepped closer, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "You mind if we take a look inside? Just to be sure." For a long moment, the man said nothing. Then he shifted his weight slightly, and Lucy saw it, the way his hand moved to rest on the rifle at his side. It was a small motion, barely noticeable, but the message was clear. The hunter saw it too. "I do mind," the man said quietly. "This is my home. You've got no right." The hunter's jaw tightened. "We've got a legal claim. Those girls are runaways. Property of their guardian." "Then your claim ends at my door," the man said. His voice was still calm, but there was iron beneath it now. "I've told you I haven't seen them. Now you'll move on, or we'll have a different kind of conversation." The two men stared at each other, the air between them thick with tension. One of the other hunters stepped forward. "Chayton, don't be a fool. We know you're Comanche. You harbor white runaways. They'll come for you too." The man, Chayton, didn't flinch. "Let them come," he said. The lead hunter spat into the dirt. He looked back at his men, then at the hounds, still pulling toward the door. For a moment, it seemed he might push further. But then he saw the way Chayton's hand rested on his rifle, saw the calm certainty in his eyes, and something shifted. "Fine," the hunter muttered. "But if we find out you're lying, we'll be back. And we won't be asking politely." Chayton said nothing. He simply stood there, unmoving, until the men turned and walked off the porch. The hounds resisted, whining and barking. But their handlers dragged them away. Chayton remained in the doorway, watching until the torches disappeared into the trees, until the voices faded into the night. Only then did he step back inside and close the door, sliding the bar into place once more. He turned to face the girls. Lucy and Anna sat frozen, their eyes wide, their faces pale. They had heard every word. They had felt the weight of that moment, the closeness of being found. And yet, here they were. Still safe. Still hidden. Chayton set his rifle against the wall and walked to the fire. He crouched down, added another log, and then looked over his shoulder at them. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." Lucy's throat was tight. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't you turn us in?" Chayton was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost distant. "Because no one deserves to be hunted like an animal," he said. "Not you. Not anyone." He stood and moved to the bed in the corner, pulling a blanket from it. He laid it on the floor near the fire. "Sleep," he said. "You're safe here." And for the first time in 3 days, Lucy believed it, but sleep didn't come easily. Lucy lay on the floor beside Anna, wrapped in the warmth of the bearskin, staring at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. Her body was exhausted, every muscle screaming for rest, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept hearing the hunter's voice, kept seeing the way Chayton had stood his ground, rifle in hand, willing to face down 4 armed men for 2 strangers. Anna had fallen asleep almost instantly, her breathing soft and even, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Lucy envied her that, the ability to let go. But Lucy had always been the protector, the one who stayed awake when danger was near, the one who listened for footsteps in the dark. It was a role she'd learned young, and it had kept them alive across the room. Chayton sat in a chair near the door, his rifle resting across his lap. He hadn't moved in over an hour, hadn't spoken. His eyes were fixed on the door, alert, watchful. Lucy wondered if he ever slept, or if he too had learned that safety was a fleeting thing, something that could vanish the moment you closed your eyes. She studied him in the firelight, this stranger who had risked everything for them. His face was stern, carved from years of hardship, but there was something else beneath it, something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't kindness exactly, at least not the soft, gentle kind. It was something harder, more deliberate. A choice made not from sentiment but from principle. "You should sleep," Chayton said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. Lucy startled, realizing he'd been watching her. "I can't," she admitted quietly. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear them. The dogs. The men." Chayton nodded slowly, as though he understood. "Fear has a way of staying with you long after the danger has passed," he said. "But you're safe tonight. I give you my word." Lucy wanted to believe him, wanted to let those words settle into her chest and ease the tight knot of anxiety that had lived there for days. But trust was a fragile thing, and she'd learned the hard way that words could be lies. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked, partly to distract herself, partly because she genuinely wanted to know. Chayton was quiet for a long moment, and Lucy thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and measured. "My people were driven from these lands years ago," he said. "Most moved west, to the reservations. But I stayed. This place holds the memory of my family, my wife, my daughter. I couldn't leave them behind." Lucy's breath caught. What happened to them? Chayton's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she'd pushed too far. But then he answered, his voice hollow. "Sickness. Winter of '68. I was out hunting, gone for 3 days. When I came back, they were both gone. Fever took them fast." The weight of his grief filled the room, heavy and suffocating. "I'm sorry," Lucy whispered. Chayton shook his head. "It was a long time ago. But it taught me something. Life is fragile. We protect what we can, while we can. That's all any of us can do." Lucy felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She understood now, understood why he'd opened his door, why he'd stood against those men. He was protecting them the way he couldn't protect his own family. "You remind me of her," Chayton said suddenly, his gaze meeting Lucy's. "My daughter. She would have been about your age now. She had your same eyes, fierce and stubborn." Lucy didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But something shifted in her chest, a small easing of the weight she'd been carrying. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters and moaning through the trees. Lucy pulled the bearskin tighter around herself and Anna, and finally, slowly, her eyes began to grow heavy. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Chayton looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Tomorrow brings its own troubles. Rest while you can." And with that, Lucy finally let her eyes close. Let the warmth and the safety of the moment carry her into sleep. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the shutters, pale and tentative, as though testing whether the world was safe enough to illuminate. Lucy woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke, her body stiff and aching from 3 days of running. For a moment, she forgot where she was, panic rising in her chest until she saw Anna sleeping peacefully beside her. Still wrapped in the bearskin, Chayton stood at the hearth, pouring dark liquid from a tin pot into a clay cup. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard Lucy stir. "There's cornbread on the table," he said, "and water in the pitcher." Lucy sat up slowly, her muscles protesting every movement. She looked around the cabin in the daylight, seeing details she'd missed in the darkness. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, their earthy scent mingling with the smoke. A bow and quiver of arrows rested against the wall beside the rifle. On a small shelf sat a collection of carved wooden figures, animals mostly, bears and wolves and eagles, each one rendered with careful precision. There was also a small doll, its dress faded and worn. And Lucy understood without asking that it had belonged to his daughter. Anna stirred beside her, blinking awake with confusion that quickly melted into relief when she saw Lucy. "We're still here," she whispered, as though saying it too loudly might break the spell. Lucy nodded and helped her sister to her feet. They moved to the table where Chayton had laid out their breakfast, simple but more than they'd had in days. The cornbread was dense and filling, still warm from the fire. Lucy ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Anna devoured hers with the single-minded focus of someone who'd known hunger too well. Chayton sat across from them, his own plate untouched, his eyes moving between the girls and the door. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said finally. Lucy's stomach tightened. She'd known this moment was coming, known that safety couldn't last forever. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "Those men. They won't stop looking for us." Chayton nodded. "Your uncle sent them?" Lucy's jaw clenched at the mention of him. "He's not really our uncle. He was our father's brother, but he never cared about us. When our father died, he took us in because the law said he had to. But he only wanted us for the work we could do." Anna spoke up, her voice small but steady. "He beat us. Locked us in the cellar when we did something wrong. Sometimes for days." Her hand moved unconsciously to her arm, where Lucy knew bruises still mottled the skin beneath her torn sleeve. Chayton's expression darkened, but he said nothing, just listened. "3 nights ago, he came at Anna with an iron poker," Lucy continued, her voice shaking with the memory. "He was drunk, angry about something that wasn't even her fault. I saw the look in his eyes, and I knew if we stayed, he'd kill one of us eventually. So we ran." Chayton leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming once against the wooden armrest. "The men who came last night, they said you're his property. That there's a legal claim." Lucy's hands balled into fists. "The law doesn't care what happens behind closed doors. It only cares that we belong to him until we're grown." "Then the law is wrong," Chayton said simply. Anna looked up at him with wide eyes, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "But that doesn't change the fact that they'll keep hunting you. A man like your uncle, he won't let you go out of principle. It's about control, about not being defied." Lucy felt the hopelessness creeping back in, the same despair that had chased them through the woods. "So what do? We can't run forever. We're just children." Chayton stood and walked to the window, peering out at the forest beyond. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning mist. "There's a town 2 days north of here," he said. "Fort Griffin. They have a marshal there, a man named Carson. He's fair, doesn't bend to pressure easy. If anyone can help you, it's him." Lucy's heart sank. "You're sending us away." Chayton turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I'm giving you a chance. You stay here. Those men will come back with more numbers, and I can't hold off a dozen armed men alone. But if you make it to Fort Griffin, if you tell the marshal what your uncle did, there's a chance he'll intervene. And if he doesn't?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chayton was silent for a long moment. "Then at least you tried. At least you fought." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Can't you come with us?" Chayton shook his head. "A Comanche man traveling with 2 white girls would draw more attention than you can afford. People in these parts don't trust my kind, and they'd ask questions that would put you in more danger. You'll move faster and safer on your own." Lucy wanted to argue, wanted to beg him to reconsider, but she could see the logic in his words. She also saw something else in his eyes, a flicker of pain, as though sending them away cost him something too. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tonight," Chayton said. "After dark. The men who came last night will be watching the roads during the day, but at night you'll have cover. I'll give you supplies, show you the safest route. If you move fast and stay quiet, you can reach Fort Griffin before they realize you've left this area." The rest of the day passed in a strange mixture of preparation and waiting. Chayton gathered supplies, packing dried meat, cornbread, and a waterskin into a leather satchel. He showed Lucy how to read the stars for direction, how to move through the forest without leaving tracks, how to listen for the sounds that meant danger. Anna stayed close to Lucy, her usual brightness dimmed by the knowledge that they'd be alone again soon. She helped where she could, folding the blankets Chayton gave them, testing the weight of the satchel, but her movements were mechanical. Her mind clearly elsewhere. In the afternoon, Chayton took them outside to a small clearing behind the cabin. He handed Lucy a knife, its blade worn but sharp. "You'll need to know how to use this," he said. "Not just for defense, but for survival. Cutting rope, preparing food, making shelter." He spent an hour teaching her the basics, how to grip it properly, how to make clean cuts, how to strike if she had no other choice. Lucy's hands trembled at first, but Chayton was patient, his instructions clear and calm. By the end, she felt more confident, though the weight of the blade at her belt was a constant reminder of the dangers ahead. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Chayton called them back inside. He ladled out bowls of stew, the last hot meal they'd have for days, and they ate in silence. The cabin felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of impending separation. "I want to give you something," Chayton said when they'd finished eating. He rose and moved to the shelf, picking up one of the carved wooden figures. It was a bear, small enough to fit in a child's palm, its features rendered with loving detail. He handed it to Anna. "My daughter's favorite animal was the bear," he said softly. "She said it was strong and protective like her father. I made this for her the winter before she died." Anna's eyes filled with tears as she cradled the carving. "I can't take this. It's too important." Chayton shook his head. "She would want you to have it. For protection, for courage. Bears are survivors, just like you." Anna clutched the carving to her chest, unable to speak. Lucy felt her own throat tighten with emotion. Chayton turned to Lucy and held out a small leather pouch. "Herbs," he explained. "For making tea if you get sick, or poultices for wounds. My wife taught me which ones heal and which ones harm. Use them wisely." Lucy took the pouch, feeling the weight of his trust. As darkness fell, Chayton extinguished the fire, leaving only a single candle burning. He moved to the door and listened, his ear pressed against the wood. After a long moment, he nodded. "It's time." Lucy's heart began to race. Anna gripped her hand tightly. Chayton opened the door slowly, scanning the darkness beyond. The forest was alive with night sounds, crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, but nothing that suggested human presence. He stepped out onto the porch and motioned for the girls to follow. They moved silently into the night, Chayton leading them away from the cabin and into the trees. He didn't use a torch, navigating by moonlight and memory alone. Lucy kept Anna close, her hand never leaving her sister's, her eyes adjusting slowly to the darkness. They walked for what felt like hours, weaving through dense underbrush and across shallow streams. Chayton moved with the quiet grace of someone who belonged to the land, his footsteps making no sound. The girls did their best to follow his example, though branches still caught at their dresses and roots threatened to trip them. Finally, Chayton stopped at the edge of a wide trail. He pointed north. "Follow this path for 3 miles, then turn east at the split oak. You'll know it when you see it. Lightning struck it years ago, and it grows in 2 directions. From there, keep the North Star at your back and walk until dawn. Rest during the day, hidden, and travel only at night." Lucy nodded, committing his words to memory. Chayton crouched down to Anna's level, his expression gentle. "You're braver than you know, little one. Don't forget that." Anna threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. "Thank you for keeping us safe." Chayton's arms came up slowly, awkwardly, as though he'd forgotten how to embrace someone. But then he held her close, his eyes closing briefly. When Anna pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. Lucy stepped forward, unsure what to say. "I don't know how to thank you." Chayton stood, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "You survive. That's how you thank me. You survive, and you make sure no one ever controls you again." Lucy nodded, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. "Will we see you again?" Chayton looked toward the horizon, where the first stars were beginning to appear. If the world is kind, perhaps. But even if we don't, you'll carry what I've taught you. And that will be enough." He handed Lucy the satchel, adjusting the strap across her shoulder. "Now go," he said firmly, "before I change my mind and keep you here where it's safe." Lucy took Anna's hand and stepped onto the trail. She looked back once and saw Chayton standing at the edge of the trees, a dark silhouette against the night. He raised his hand in farewell. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest, silent as a ghost. Lucy squeezed Anna's hand and started walking north, each step taking them farther from the only safety they'd known in days, and closer to an uncertain future that waited somewhere in the darkness ahead. The trail stretched endlessly before them, a pale ribbon winding through darkness. Lucy and Anna moved as quietly as Chayton had taught them, their footsteps soft against the dirt, their breathing measured despite the fear that clawed at their throats. The forest around them was alive with sounds that seemed magnified in the night. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves setting Lucy's nerves on edge. Anna stumbled over an exposed root, catching herself before she fell. Lucy steadied her, whispering encouragement they both desperately needed. Just a little farther to the split oak.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
We can do this. The moon hung low and full above them, casting enough light to see by, but also enough to expose them if anyone was watching. They found the split oak just as Chayton had described. A massive tree torn down the middle by some ancient lightning strike, its two halves reaching toward the sky like supplicating arms. Lucy stopped there, pulling Anna close while she oriented herself by the stars. The North Star gleamed steady and true overhead, and she positioned it at their backs before continuing east. The terrain grew rougher as they moved away from the main trail. Dense thickets forced them to detour, and twice they had to wade through cold streams that soaked their already tattered dresses. Anna's teeth chattered, but she didn't complain. She'd learned, as Lucy had, that survival required silence and endurance above all else. Hours passed in this way, the night wearing on with agonizing slowness. Lucy's legs burned with exhaustion, her feet raw and bleeding through the thin scraps of cloth Chayton had wrapped them in. But she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant being caught. And being caught meant going back to that cellar, to those beatings, to a life worse than death. Dawn came gradually, the sky lightening from black to gray to pale blue. Lucy felt both relief and fresh anxiety as the sun crept over the horizon. Daylight meant they could see more clearly, but it also meant they could be seen. She scanned the landscape, looking for somewhere to hide. A cluster of large boulders stood about 100 yards off the path, surrounded by thick brush. Lucy led Anna toward them, pushing through brambles that tore at their skin and clothes. Behind the largest boulder was a small depression in the earth, almost like a shallow cave. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from view. They crawled inside, and Lucy immediately pulled the blankets from the satchel, wrapping one around Anna and keeping the other for herself. Anna's face was pale, her lips tinged blue from the cold stream crossings. Lucy rubbed her sister's arms vigorously, trying to restore warmth and circulation. "We made it through the first night," Lucy said, forcing optimism into her voice. "One night closer to Fort Griffin." Anna nodded weakly, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. "I'm so tired, Lucy, and my feet hurt." Lucy looked down at her sister's feet and felt her heart clench. The cloth wrappings were stained dark with blood. She carefully unwrapped them, revealing blisters that had burst and torn, leaving raw flesh exposed. Lucy reached for the leather pouch Chayton had given her, her hands shaking as she opened it. Inside were several small bundles of dried herbs, each tied with different colored thread. She tried to remember what he'd told her, which colors meant what. The blue thread, she recalled, was for wounds. She took that bundle and crushed some of the dried leaves between her palms, then mixed them with a little water from the skin to form a paste. Gently, she applied it to Anna's feet, her sister wincing but staying still. "This will help," Lucy promised, though she wasn't entirely sure. She rewrapped Anna's feet with strips torn from the hem of her own dress, then did the same for her own battered feet. The paste stung at first, then brought a cooling numbness that was almost pleasant. Lucy allowed herself to lean back against the boulder, the satchel serving as a pillow. "Sleep now," she told Anna. "I'll keep watch." But even as she said it, her own eyes grew heavy. The exhaustion of 3 days running, followed by a night of hard travel, had pushed her body beyond its limits. She fought to stay awake, knowing one of them needed to remain alert, but the darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. She jolted awake to the sound of voices. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, panic flooding through her before memory returned. Beside her, Anna still slept, her breathing soft and even. Lucy pressed herself flat against the boulder and listened. 2 men were talking, their voices carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Can't be far now," one said. "Tracks led east from that Comanche's cabin, just like I figured." Lucy's blood ran cold. They'd been followed. Or tracked. Somehow the hunters had picked up their trail. "Maybe they holed up somewhere," the second man said. 2 little girls can't have gotten far on foot in one night. The first man laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Don't matter. We'll find them. That uncle's offering $50 now for their return." $50 is worth a few days' tracking. Lucy's mind raced. $50 was a fortune to men like these, more than enough to keep them searching relentlessly. She looked at Anna, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of how close danger had come. Lucy's hand moved instinctively to the knife at her belt. The blade Chayton had given her. The voices grew louder, the men moving closer to their hiding spot. Lucy could see them now through the gaps in the brush. 2 rough-looking men with rifles slung over their shoulders, their eyes scanning the ground for tracks. One of them stopped not 20 feet from the boulder cluster. "Hold on," he said, crouching down. "Something came through here recently. See how the grass is bent?" The other man joined him, studying the ground. Lucy's heart hammered so hard, she was certain they could hear it. Her hand tightened on the knife, though she knew it would be useless against 2 armed men. Anna stirred beside her, her eyes fluttering open. Lucy immediately clamped a hand over her sister's mouth, shaking her head frantically. Anna's eyes went wide with understanding and fear. They both froze, barely breathing, as the men moved even closer. "Could be deer," the second man said. "Plenty of game in these parts." The first man straightened, looking around with narrowed eyes. "Maybe, but we should check those rocks just to be sure." Lucy's stomach dropped. They were going to be found. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide then. Cutting through the tension like a blade came the sharp crack of a gunshot in the distance. Both men's heads snapped toward the sound. What the hell was that? Another shot followed, then another. "Could be trouble," the second man said. "We should check it out." The first man hesitated, still looking toward the boulders. But another volley of shots decided him. "All right, come on. But we're coming back here after." They turned and jogged back toward the trail, heading in the direction of the gunfire. Lucy and Anna stayed frozen for several more minutes, listening as the men's footsteps faded into the distance. Only when silence had fully returned did Lucy allow herself to breathe. Her whole body was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. Anna's eyes were filled with tears, but she made no sound. Lucy pulled her close, holding her tightly while they both trembled. "We have to move," Lucy whispered. "They'll come back." Anna nodded against her shoulder. Lucy quickly gathered their few possessions, stuffing the blankets back into the satchel. Her feet screamed in protest when she stood, but she ignored the pain. Survival meant pushing past pain. They crawled out from behind the boulder and looked around cautiously. The forest seemed empty, the only sounds the normal rustling of wildlife. Lucy oriented herself again by the sun, now climbing toward midday, and led Anna away from their hiding spot at an angle that would take them farther from both the trail and the direction the men had gone. They moved through dense forest for hours, thorns tearing at their clothes and skin. Lucy's sense of direction began to falter as the canopy grew thicker, blocking out the sun. She started to panic, wondering if they were walking in circles, if they'd ever find Fort Griffin, or if they'd simply wander until exhaustion or the hunters claimed them. Then Anna tugged on her sleeve, pointing ahead. Through the trees, Lucy could see a break in the foliage, and beyond it, the glimmer of water. They pushed through the last of the undergrowth and emerged on the bank of a wide river. The water moved swiftly, dark and deep, its surface catching the afternoon light. Lucy's heart sank. They'd have to cross it to continue east, but the current looked treacherous. Neither she nor Anna knew how to swim. They stood on the bank, staring at the water, when a voice behind them made them both jump. "That's the Brazos River," the voice said. Lucy spun around, her hand going to her knife, and found herself face to face with an old woman. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, her skin weathered by sun and age, her hair white as snow and tied back in a simple braid. She wore a faded calico dress and carried a walking stick. "Easy now," the woman said, holding up a wrinkled hand. "I'm not here to hurt you." Lucy kept her hand on the knife but didn't draw it. "Who are you?" The old woman smiled gently. "Name's Martha Wilder. I live about a half-mile upstream. Saw you two emerge from the forest looking lost as lambs." Anna stepped closer to Lucy, her eyes wary. Martha's gaze moved between them, taking in their torn dresses, their bloodied feet, their hollow eyes. Her expression softened with understanding. "You're running from something," she said. It wasn't a question. Lucy saw no point in lying. "From men who want to take us back to someone who hurts us." Martha nodded slowly, leaning on her walking stick. "Figured it was something like that. You've got the look of hunted things." She gestured toward the river. "You planning to cross?" "We have to get to Fort Griffin," Lucy said. "But we don't know how." Martha was quiet for a moment, studying them. Then she made a decision. "Come with me. I've got a canoe hidden upstream. I'll take you across." Lucy's instinct was to refuse, to trust no one. But exhaustion and desperation made her waver. "Why would you help us?" Martha's eyes, faded blue but still sharp, met hers steadily. "Because when I was a girl, not much older than you, I was running too. From a husband who beat me near to death. And a Kiowa woman found me half dead in the prairie and saved my life. I swore then that if I ever had the chance, I'd pay that kindness forward." Something in her voice, in her eyes, made Lucy believe her. She looked at Anna, who nodded slightly. "Thank you," Lucy said quietly. Martha turned and started walking upstream, moving with surprising speed for someone her age. The girls followed, true to her word. Martha led them to a spot where a small canoe was pulled up onto the bank and covered with branches. She uncovered it with practiced efficiency. "It's not much, but it's sturdy. Made it myself 40 years ago." The canoe was weathered but solid, its hull patched in several places. Martha helped them load their meager supplies, then pushed the canoe into the water. "Get in, both of you. Sit low and don't move around." Lucy and Anna climbed in carefully, settling into the bottom of the canoe. Martha pushed off and stepped in with surprising agility, taking up the paddle. She guided them across the river with strong, steady strokes. The current pulled at them, trying to drag them downstream, but Martha angled the canoe expertly, fighting the water with decades of experience. Halfway across, Lucy looked back toward the bank they'd left and saw two figures emerge from the forest, the hunters. They'd returned and tracked them to the river. One of them pointed at the canoe, shouting something Lucy couldn't hear over the rush of water. The other raised his rifle, Get down!" Martha shouted. Lucy threw herself over Anna as the crack of gunfire split the air. The bullet hit the water 10 feet short, sending up a spray. Martha paddled harder, her face set with grim determination. Another shot rang out, closer this time. But the current was carrying them farther downstream, even as Martha paddled forward, and the angle made them a difficult target. By the time the hunters could reload and aim again, they were too far away. Martha guided the canoe to the far bank, and they all scrambled out, pulling the boat onto solid ground. Lucy looked back across the river and saw the 2 men standing on the opposite bank, watching them. They were trapped there, unable to cross without finding a ford or bridge miles away. But Lucy knew this reprieve was temporary. They'd find a way across eventually. Martha pointed east. Fort Griffin is 2 days that way, maybe less if you push hard. Stay away from the main roads and you should make it. She reached into a pocket of her dress and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Corn pony and dried apples. Not much, but it's something. Lucy took the bundle, her throat tight with emotion. "How can we ever repay you?" Martha smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Like I said, you pay it forward. Someday, when you're grown and safe, you help someone else who's running. That's how kindness survives in this world." She climbed back into her canoe and pushed off, letting the current carry her downstream toward whatever home she'd made for herself. Lucy watched until the old woman disappeared around a bend in the river, then turned to Anna. "Come on," she said. "We still have a long way to go." They walked east through the afternoon, their wet clothes drying slowly in the sun, their feet aching but carrying them forward. Behind them, across an uncrossable river, their hunters raged. Ahead of them, Fort Griffin waited with uncertain promises. But for now, they were alive, they were together, and they were free. As evening approached, they found shelter in a hollowed-out log and divided Martha's gift between them. The corn pony was dense and filling, the dried apples sweet as honey. They ate slowly, savoring every bite, knowing it might be their last meal for a while. When darkness fell, they curled up together inside the log. Anna clutching her wooden bear, Lucy keeping one hand on her knife. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the wind, came the faint sound of howling. Not wolves this time, but dogs. The hunters had found a way across the river after all, and they were coming. The howling grew louder through the night, a sound that turned Lucy's blood to ice. She lay awake inside the hollow log, her arm wrapped protectively around Anna, listening as the baying of hounds echoed through the darkness. They'd crossed the river somehow, found a ford, or convinced someone to ferry them. And now they were closing in with the relentless determination of men who smelled profit. Anna stirred against her, waking to the terrible sound. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're getting closer." Lucy's mind raced through their options, each one more desperate than the last. They couldn't outrun dogs, couldn't hide their scent, couldn't fight armed men. But surrender meant going back, and going back meant death, slow or fast. "We move now," Lucy said, crawling out of the log despite every instinct screaming at her to stay hidden. "If we keep going east, toward Fort Griffin, maybe we'll find help before they find us." It was a thin hope. Fragile as morning frost, but it was all they had. They gathered their belongings in frantic silence and started moving through the darkness. The forest was treacherous at night, full of hidden dangers, roots that grabbed at ankles, branches that whipped across faces. But fear pushed them forward faster than caution would allow. Behind them, the howling continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but never gone. Lucy tried to remember everything Chayton had taught her about moving without leaving tracks. She led Anna through a shallow creek, hoping the water would mask their scent. They walked upstream for nearly a mile, their feet numb from the cold. Before climbing out on the opposite bank and continuing east, dawn found them exhausted and shivering. Their clothes soaked, their strength nearly spent. But the howling had faded to silence, which meant either the dogs had lost their trail, or the hunters were close enough that they no longer needed to bay. Lucy didn't know which possibility terrified her more. The forest began to thin as they walked, giving way to rolling grassland dotted with mesquite and scrub oak. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, Lucy saw smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Her heart leaped with desperate hope. "Anna, look! That must be Fort Griffin." But the open ground between them and the town was exposed, offering no cover. If the hunters were nearby, crossing that space would make them visible for miles. Lucy crouched behind a cluster of rocks, pulling Anna down beside her, studying the landscape with anxious eyes. "We have to wait for dark again," she said, though every fiber of her being screamed to run for that town now, to reach safety before their luck ran out. Anna's face was pale, her lips cracked and bleeding. "I don't think I can walk much farther, Lucy. Everything hurts." Lucy pulled her sister close, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. Anna was feverish, her body finally surrendering to the punishment of 3 days without proper food or rest, of cold creek crossings and torn feet and endless terror. Lucy felt panic rising in her throat like bile. She dug through the satchel with shaking hands, finding the leather pouch of herbs Chayton had given her. She tried to remember what he'd said about fever, which bundle to use. The red thread, she thought, or maybe the yellow. Her hands trembled as she untied both, crushing the leaves and mixing them with water to make a bitter tea. "Drink this," she urged, holding the makeshift cup to Anna's lips. Her sister gagged at the taste but swallowed obediently. Lucy wrapped her in both blankets and held her close, rocking slightly, whispering promises she had no way to keep. "You're going to be fine. We're almost there. Just hold on a little longer." The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Lucy kept watch from behind the rocks, her eyes scanning constantly for any sign of the hunters. Anna drifted in and out of fevered sleep, mumbling words Lucy couldn't understand. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive, and Lucy realized with growing dread that Anna needed real medicine. A real doctor, not just herbs and desperate prayers. She made a decision that terrified her but felt inevitable. They couldn't wait for darkness. Anna might not survive another day exposed to the elements. They had to risk the open ground now, in daylight, and pray they could reach Fort Griffin before the hunters spotted them. Lucy gathered their things and gently shook Anna awake. "We're going now. Can you walk?" Anna's eyes were glassy with fever, but she nodded. Lucy helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they emerged from behind the rocks and started across the grassland. Each step felt like an eternity. The town ahead seemed to grow no closer despite their progress, as though they were walking on some cruel treadmill that kept salvation forever out of reach. Lucy's legs trembled with exhaustion, her own body near its breaking point, but she forced herself forward. One step, then another, then another. They were perhaps halfway across the open ground when Lucy heard the sound she'd been dreading. A shout, distant but clear, followed by the excited barking of dogs. She looked back over her shoulder and saw them. 4 men on horseback emerging from the tree line they'd left behind. And running ahead of the horses, 2 hounds straining at their leashes. "No," Lucy breathed, the word barely a sound. The men had spotted them, were already spurring their horses into a gallop. The distance between them was closing with terrible speed. Lucy looked at Anna, at her sister's fevered face and weakened body, and knew with crushing certainty that they couldn't outrun mounted men, but she tried anyway. "Run, Anna, please, just a little farther." They stumbled forward, Anna leaning heavily against Lucy's side, both of them moving with the desperate, graceless panic of prey animals. The town was still a mile away, might as well have been 100. Behind them, the thunder of hoofbeats grew louder. Lucy could hear the men now, their voices calling to each other with the triumph of hunters who'd finally cornered their quarry. "Got them! Right there. The dogs were barking in frenzied excitement. Lucy's vision blurred with tears of frustration and rage. To come so close, to see safety ahead and yet be caught anyway. She felt Anna's legs give out, her sister collapsing against her with a sob of exhaustion. Lucy tried to hold her up, but her own strength was gone. They sank to their knees in the tall grass, Lucy wrapping her arms around Anna, as though she could shield her from what was coming. The riders were nearly upon them now. Lucy could hear the heavy breathing of the horses, could smell the sweat and leather. She fumbled for the knife at her belt, knowing it was useless, but unable to surrender without some gesture of defiance. Her hand closed around the handle, then a new sound cut through everything else. The crack of a rifle, sharp and authoritative, followed by a voice that carried across the grassland like a whip. "That's far enough." The riders pulled up hard, their horses rearing and snorting. Lucy looked toward the sound and saw 3 men on horseback emerging from Fort Griffin. Riding at a gallop toward them, the lead rider wore a tin star on his chest that caught the sunlight. He was older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a face carved from granite. He held his rifle trained on the hunters with the steady confidence of a man who knew how to use it. The 2 men flanking him were younger but no less determined, their own weapons drawn. "Marshal Carson," one of the hunters called out, trying to inject friendliness into his voice. "These girls are runaways. We've got legal claim to return them to their guardian." The marshal didn't lower his rifle. "That so? Well, I've got legal authority to investigate before anyone gets returned anywhere. So you boys are going to back off while I talk to these children." The lead hunter's face darkened with anger. "We've been tracking them for 4 days. They belong to their uncle, and he's paying us to bring them back. You got no right to interfere." Marshal Carson's expression didn't change. "I've got every right. This is my jurisdiction, and these girls are now under my protection until I determine what's what. You don't like it, you can file a complaint." From a distance, for a tense moment, no one moved. Lucy held her breath, her arms still tight around Anna, wondering if the hunters would actually challenge a lawman over $50. But whatever else they weren't fools. The lead hunter spat into the grass, his face twisted with frustration. "This ain't over, Marshal. That uncle's got legal papers. You'll have to hand them over eventually." Marshal Carson finally lowered his rifle, though his posture remained alert. "Maybe so. But that'll be decided proper-like, with a judge and everything done legal. Not by bounty hunters with dogs in the middle of nowhere. Now ride out, before I decide to arrest you for disturbing the peace." The hunters exchanged glances, weighing their options. Finally, with visible reluctance, they turned their horses and started back toward the tree line, the dogs whining in protest at being pulled away from their prize. Lucy watched them go, unable to believe they were actually leaving, that this nightmare might actually have an end. Marshal Carson dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. He crouched down a few feet away, his weathered face gentle despite his harsh demeanor with the hunters. "Easy now," he said softly. "Nobody's going to hurt you. My name's William Carson, and I'm the law in Fort Griffin. Can you tell me your names?" Lucy's voice came out hoarse and broken. "Lucy, this is my sister Anna. She's sick." Carson's eyes moved to Anna, taking in her flushed cheeks and glassy eyes. He turned to one of his deputies. "Ride back and fetch Doc Henderson. Tell him we need him at the jail, and it's urgent." The deputy wheeled his horse and galloped toward town. Carson looked back at Lucy. "Can she ride? We need to get you both somewhere safe and warm." Lucy nodded, though she wasn't sure Anna could even sit up. Carson solved the problem by simply lifting Anna in his arms as though she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse and mounting with her cradled against his chest. The other deputy helped Lucy onto his own horse, and together they rode toward Fort Griffin. Lucy kept her eyes on Anna, on her sister's pale face pressed against the marshal's chest. and felt something inside her finally release. They'd made it. Against all odds, through 4 days of hell. They'd actually made it. Fort Griffin was bigger than Lucy had imagined. A proper frontier town with wooden buildings lining a main street. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple. People stopped to stare as the marshal rode through with his sick child in his arms and a filthy, exhausted girl on the deputy's horse. But Carson ignored them all. He headed straight for a sturdy building with bars on the windows and a sign that read, Marshal's Office and Jail. Inside, it was sparse but clean, with a desk, several chairs, and 3 cells in the back. Carson laid Anna on a cot in one of the cells, the door left open, and covered her with a clean blanket from a trunk. Lucy rushed to her sister's side, taking her hot hand. "You're going to be okay now," she whispered. "The doctor's coming." Anna's eyes fluttered open, briefly, unfocused but seeking Lucy's face. "Are we safe?" she breathed. "Yes," Lucy said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, we're finally safe." The doctor arrived within minutes, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and capable hands. He examined Anna thoroughly while Lucy hovered nearby, answering his questions about symptoms and timeline. When he was finished, he mixed a powder into water and helped Anna drink it. "Fever from exhaustion and exposure," he diagnosed. "Her feet are badly infected, and she's severely malnourished."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story.
"But she's young and strong. With rest and proper care, she'll recover." Lucy felt her legs give out with relief. The deputy caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to a chair. Marshal Carson brought her a cup of water and a plate of bread and cheese. Lucy tried to eat slowly, but found herself devouring it like a starved animal, which she supposed she was. Carson watched her with a mixture of pity and professional assessment. When she'd finished, he pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "Now then," he said gently, "I need you to tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So Lucy told him about their father's death, about the uncle who'd taken them in, not out of love but obligation, about the beatings, the cellar, the night she'd seen him coming at Anna with the poker, about running, about Chayton who'd sheltered them, about Martha who'd helped them cross the river. She told him everything, her voice steady despite the tears that wouldn't stop falling. Carson listened without interrupting, his face growing harder with each detail. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "This uncle of yours," he finally said, "he have legal guardianship papers?" Lucy nodded. "Our father made him our guardian in his will. We have nowhere else to go." Carson's jaw tightened. "Legal papers or not, no child should be beaten and starved. Problem is, the law's funny about these things. Guardians have a lot of leeway in how they discipline their wards. But what you're describing goes beyond discipline. That's abuse, plain and simple. So what happens now?" Lucy asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Do you have to send us back to him?" Carson shook his head firmly. "Not if I can help it. I'm going to wire the circuit judge, get him here to make a proper ruling. Until then, you girls are staying right here where I can protect you. And if your uncle or those bounty hunters show up, they'll have to go through me." Lucy felt a wave of gratitude so intense it was almost painful. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Carson's expression softened. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got a fight ahead. But I promise you this, I don't care what the papers say. I won't let you go back to a man who hurts you. One way or another, we'll find you a better place." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "You mentioned someone named Chayton, a Comanche who helped you." Lucy nodded. "He saved our lives twice." Carson turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. There's not many who'd stand up to bounty hunters for 2 white children, especially not a Comanche in these times. He must be a good man. He is, Lucy said with certainty. He lost his own family, and I think helping us helped him somehow. He gave us food, taught us how to survive, faced down the hunters at his door. Without him, we'd already be dead or back in that cellar. Carson nodded slowly. Well, if he comes through Fort Griffin, I'd like to thank him myself. The doctor emerged from the cell where Anna slept. The fever's already coming down. She'll sleep through the night, probably most of tomorrow too. Her body needs to heal. Lucy wanted to stay by her sister's side. But Carson's wife, a sturdy woman named Ruth, who'd been summoned to help, insisted Lucy needed cleaning up and proper rest herself. Ruth led Lucy to their home adjacent to the marshal's office and drew her a hot bath, the first Lucy had had in months. She washed away days of grime and fear, watching the water turn dark. Ruth provided clean clothes, simple but warm, and fed Lucy a proper meal of stew and cornbread. Then she put Lucy to bed in a small room with lace curtains and a quilted blanket. For the first time in 4 days, Lucy slept in an actual bed, in a room with a locked door between her and the world. She slept deeply, without dreams, her body finally surrendering to the safety it had been denied for so long. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. Fort Griffin. Marshal Carson. Safety. Anna. Lucy bolted upright, her heart racing. She needed to see her sister, needed to make sure it wasn't all a dream. She dressed quickly and rushed next door to the marshal's office. Anna was awake, sitting up in the cot, her color already better. When she saw Lucy, her face lit up with a smile that made Lucy's heart soar. "Lucy, you look different when you're clean." Lucy laughed, the sound strange after days of fear and silence. She sat on the edge of the cot and hugged Anna carefully, mindful of her injuries. "How do you feel?" Lucy asked. "Tired," Anna admitted. "But better. The marshal's wife brought me breakfast. Real eggs and bacon, Lucy." I almost cried. They sat together, just being present, alive, safe. Through the window, they could see the town going about its business. People walking past, horses tied to hitching posts. Normal life continuing, as though the world hadn't just tilted back onto its axis for 2 runaway girls. But outside that window, miles away, their uncle was surely already planning his next move. And somewhere between here and there, Chayton walked alone through forests that remembered his daughter's laughter. The story wasn't over yet. But for now, for this moment, 2 sisters sat together in the morning light, and that was enough. 3 days passed in Fort Griffin like a dream after a nightmare. Lucy and Anna stayed in the spare room at Marshal Carson's home, under the watchful care of his wife Ruth, who proved to be as fierce in her kindness as her husband was in his protection. Anna's fever broke completely on the 2nd day, and by the 3rd she was walking around the house, her feet still bandaged but healing. Lucy spent those days in a strange state between relief and anxiety. Every sound made her jump, every unfamiliar face on the street made her wonder if her uncle had arrived. But Marshal Carson had posted deputies at both ends of town with orders to watch for anyone matching the uncle's description or the bounty hunters who'd chased them. On the morning of the 4th day, Marshal Carson called Lucy into his office. His expression was serious, and Lucy's stomach tightened with familiar dread. "The circuit judge arrives tomorrow," he said without preamble. "Judge Hartwell. He'll hear both sides and make a ruling on your guardianship." Lucy's hands clenched in her lap. "Will our uncle be here?" Carson nodded gravely. "He sent a telegram yesterday. Says he's arriving on today's stage with his legal papers and a lawyer. Says you girls ran away after he caught you stealing from him, and that everything you've said about him is lies told to avoid punishment." Lucy felt rage flood through her, hot and bitter. "That's not true. We never stole anything." He's the liar. Carson held up a hand. I believe you, Lucy, but belief isn't the same as proof in a court of law. Your uncle has papers saying he's your legal guardian. What we need is evidence that he abused you, and that's harder to come by. We have scars, Lucy said desperately. Anna's back is covered in marks from his belt. My arm was broken last year and healed crooked because he wouldn't let a doctor see it. Isn't that proof? Carson's expression was pained. It's something. But a good lawyer will argue that discipline, even harsh discipline, is a guardian's right. We need more. We need someone who witnessed the abuse, someone willing to testify. Lucy's mind raced through possibilities, all of them dead ends. Their father's friends had disappeared after his death, uncomfortable with getting involved. The neighbors had heard them crying but had never intervened. They were alone in this, just as they'd been alone in that house. Then a thought struck her. Chayton, she said. He saw us that first night, saw how terrified we were, how injured. And he stood up to the bounty hunters. Wouldn't that count for something? Carson considered this carefully. It might, if he'd testify. But tracking down a Comanche in these parts isn't easy. And even if we found him, getting him to come to a white man's court is another matter entirely. A lot of his people have learned that our justice isn't meant for them. Before Lucy could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw a stagecoach pulling up in front of the general store. Marshal Carson stood, his hand instinctively moving to the pistol at his hip. Stay here, he told Lucy, but she followed him to the door anyway. Unable to stop herself, two men climbed down from the stage. The first was tall and reed-thin, dressed in a dark suit that marked him as a city lawyer. The second man made Lucy's blood turn to ice. Her uncle, Silas Garrett, looked exactly as she remembered, broad-shouldered and cruel-eyed, his face flushed red from drink or anger or both. He spotted the marshal's office and started walking directly toward it. Carson stepped out onto the wooden walkway, positioning himself between Garrett and his office. That's close enough, Mr. Garrett. Garrett stopped, his eyes narrowing. I'm here for my nieces, Marshal. I have every legal right to take them home. The lawyer beside him nodded officiously. My client has full guardianship papers, signed and notarized. The girls are his legal wards. And the girls have accused him of severe abuse, Carson replied evenly. Until Judge Hartwell makes his ruling tomorrow, those children stay in my custody. Garrett's face darkened with rage. They're lying little thieves who ran away to avoid punishment for stealing. I've been worried sick, spent a fortune hiring men to find them. Lucy couldn't stay silent. She pushed past Carson onto the walkway, her fists clenched at her sides. You're the liar. You beat us, starved us, locked us in the cellar for days. You were going to kill Anna with that poker. Garrett's expression twisted into something ugly. You see, Marshal? Hysterical lies, just like I said. She's always been a troublemaker, that one. Needs a firm hand. The firm hand that broke her arm? Carson interjected coldly. Or the one that left scars all over her sister's back. The lawyer cleared his throat. Discipline is not abuse, Marshal. The law gives guardians broad authority to correct wayward children. Unless you have concrete proof of unlawful conduct, you're interfering with my client's legal rights. Carson's jaw tightened, and Lucy knew they were losing this battle of words. Legal authority trumped moral certainty in the eyes of the law. She felt despair creeping back in, the same helplessness she'd felt in that cellar, watching her uncle's shadow fall across the door. Then a voice cut through the tension, quiet but carrying an undeniable authority. I have proof. Everyone turned. Chayton stood at the edge of the walkway, having appeared as silently as smoke. He wore the same buckskin clothing Lucy remembered, his rifle slung across his back, his dark eyes fixed on Garrett with an intensity that made the larger man take an involuntary step backward. Lucy's heart leaped. Chayton! How did you? He didn't look at her, his gaze never leaving Garrett. "I've been tracking you since you left my cabin," he said. "Wanted to make sure you reached safety. I was in the hills above town when I saw him arrive." He gestured toward Garrett with contempt. Marshal Carson stepped forward, studying Chayton with new interest. "You're the one who sheltered them. Lucy told me what you did." Chayton nodded once. "I sheltered them because they came to my door running for their lives. I saw their condition that night, saw the fear in their eyes, the marks on their bodies. I heard them speak of what this man did to them." The lawyer scoffed. "The testimony of a savage won't hold weight in any court. Judge Hartwell will dismiss it out of hand." Chayton's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I'm no savage, lawyer. I speak 3 languages, and I know your laws better than you think. And I'm willing to swear before your judge exactly what I witnessed." Garrett found his voice again, though it came out strangled with rage. "This is absurd. You're going to take the word of a Comanche over a white man with legal documents? Marshal, I demand you release my nieces to me immediately." Carson crossed his arms. "And I'm telling you that's not happening. Not until the judge hears all the evidence tomorrow." "This is kidnapping," the lawyer sputtered. "We'll file charges." Carson smiled without humor. "You do that. In the meantime, Mr. Garrett, I suggest you find accommodations at the hotel. And I'd advise you to stay well away from my office and these girls, or I'll arrest you for harassment." Garrett looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Carson's stance, combined with Chayton's silent presence, made him reconsider. He spat into the dirt and turned away, the lawyer hurrying after him. "This isn't over," Garrett called back. "Those girls are mine by law, and tomorrow the judge will confirm it." When they disappeared into the hotel, Lucy finally allowed herself to breathe. She turned to Chayton, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You came back. You didn't have to, but you came back." Chayton's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "I told you I'd been tracking you. Did you think I'd let you face this alone?" Marshal Carson extended his hand to Chayton. "I'm grateful for your help. Will you testify tomorrow?" Chayton shook his hand firmly. "I will. Though your lawyer is right about one thing. Many judges in these parts don't value the testimony of my people. But I'll speak my truth regardless of whether it's heard." "Judge Hartwell is fair," Carson said. "Stern, but fair. He'll listen." Chayton nodded, though his expression suggested he'd believe it when he saw it. Anna appeared in the doorway then, having heard the commotion. When she saw Chayton, her face lit up with joy. "You found us." She rushed forward and hugged him around the waist, and Chayton's arms came up slowly to return the embrace. Lucy saw his eyes close briefly, saw the pain and memory that crossed his face. When Anna pulled back, she was holding the carved wooden bear he'd given her. "I kept it safe. It gave me courage." Chayton knelt down to her level, his large hand gentle as it touched her hair. "You have your own courage, little one. The bear only reminded you it was there." Ruth Carson appeared with food and coffee, insisting that everyone come inside. They gathered around the table in the marshal's office. An unlikely group united by circumstance and shared purpose. As they ate, Chayton told them about following the girls' trail. About finding the place where they'd hidden from the hunters. About meeting Martha Wilder at the river crossing. "She's the one who told me which direction you'd gone," he said. "Remarkable woman. She said she saw strength in you both." Lucy found herself studying Chayton as he spoke. This man who'd lost everything yet still found the capacity to care about 2 strangers. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why risk so much for us? You could have stayed hidden, stayed safe in your cabin. Why track us all this way?" Chayton was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was soft but steady. "Because my daughter would have been your age now. And because every time I see a child suffering, I see her face. I couldn't save her from the fever, But perhaps I can save you from something worse." The room fell quiet, the weight of his words settling over them all. Ruth Carson wiped tears from her eyes. Marshal Carson cleared his throat gruffly. Anna reached across the table and took Chaitin's hand, holding it tight. The rest of the day passed in preparation for the hearing. Marshal Carson went over what questions Lucy and Anna might be asked, warning them that Garrett's lawyer would try to make them seem like liars or troublemakers. Chaitin sat quietly through most of it, but when Carson asked him what he planned to say, his answer was simple: "I'll tell the truth. I'll describe their condition when they arrived at my cabin, their terror, their injuries. I'll tell how those hunters came to my door and how I sent them away. And I'll tell the judge that no child who's been properly cared for runs barefoot through winter forests with bleeding feet and hollow eyes." His gaze moved to Garrett's hotel across the street. "That man is a coward who beats children. The judge needs to know that." As evening fell, Ruth insisted that Chaitin stay for supper. Over a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables, the conversation turned to lighter topics. Anna told Chaitin about the hot bath she'd had, describing it with such enthusiasm that he smiled despite himself. Lucy found herself relaxing for the first time since seeing her uncle arrive. After supper, Marshal Carson offered Chaitin a place to sleep in one of the empty cells, but Chaitin declined. "I'm more comfortable under the stars," he said. "But I'll be nearby. If there's trouble in the night, I'll know." He looked at Lucy and Anna. "Sleep without fear tonight. Tomorrow we face your uncle together." Lucy walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate for everything he'd done. "For all of it." Chaitin studied her face in the lamplight. "You're stronger than you know, Lucy. Whatever the judge decides tomorrow, remember that. You survived because you refused to give up. That strength doesn't go away just because you're standing in a courtroom instead of a forest." He disappeared into the darkness, and Lucy returned inside to find Anna already falling asleep in their room. She lay down beside her sister, listening to the sounds of Fort Griffin settling in for the night. Somewhere out there, Chaitin was keeping watch. Somewhere else, her uncle was plotting tomorrow's arguments. And somewhere between hope and fear, Lucy waited for morning. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to Ruth shaking her shoulder gently. "Lucy, dear, it's time to get ready. The judge will convene at 9. Lucy's stomach churned with anxiety as she dressed in the clean clothes Ruth had provided. Anna was already awake, looking pale but determined. They ate breakfast in silence, the food sitting heavy in Lucy's stomach. Marshal Carson appeared dressed in his formal uniform, his badge polished to a shine. "Judge Hartwell is already at the courthouse," he said. "Your uncle and his lawyer arrived an hour ago. Chaitin is waiting outside." As they walked across the street toward the small building that served as Fort Griffin's courthouse, Lucy saw townspeople gathering, curious about the proceedings. She saw Garrett standing on the courthouse steps with his lawyer, and the hatred in his eyes when he spotted her made her blood run cold. But then she felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Chaitin standing beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Remember what I told you," he said quietly. "You're stronger than fear." Lucy nodded and took Anna's hand. Together, flanked by Marshal Carson and Chaitin, they climbed the courthouse steps inside. Judge Hartwell sat behind a raised desk, his silver hair and stern countenance making him look like something carved from stone. He surveyed the assembled crowd with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When everyone had taken their places, he struck his gavel once. "This hearing is now in session," he announced. "We're here to determine the matter of guardianship for Lucy and Anna Garrett, currently held in protective custody by Marshal Carson, pending investigation of abuse allegations." His gaze moved to Lucy and Anna. "I will hear testimony from all parties, and then I will make my ruling." He looked at Garrett's lawyer. "Counselor, you may present your case." The lawyer stood, shuffling papers with officious importance. Your Honor, my client Silas Garrett is the legal guardian of these children, appointed by their late father. The girls ran away after being caught stealing, and they've concocted these abuse allegations to avoid punishment. Do you have evidence they were stealing? The judge asked. The lawyer hesitated. My client's word, Your Honor. Judge Hartwell's expression didn't change. Continue. The lawyer called Garrett to testify, and Lucy was forced to watch her uncle spin lies with practiced ease. He portrayed himself as a devoted guardian struggling to raise two difficult children. He claimed they'd been given every comfort, that their father's death had made them resentful and rebellious. He said he'd discipline them appropriately when they misbehaved, but never with excessive force. His voice dripped with false concern as he spoke of his anguish when they'd run away. Lucy's hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. Every word from his mouth was a manipulation, a careful reconstruction of reality designed to make him look innocent and them look guilty. When the lawyer finished, Judge Hartwell turned to Marshal Carson. Marshal, present your case. Carson stood and called Lucy to testify first. She walked to the witness chair on trembling legs, acutely aware of every eye in the room upon her. Judge Hartwell looked at her with those sharp, assessing eyes. Miss Garrett, tell me in your own words why you ran away. Lucy took a deep breath and began to speak. Lucy's voice started as barely more than a whisper. But as she spoke, something inside her hardened into steel. She told Judge Hartwell everything, holding nothing back. She described the cellar where they'd been locked for days without food. The beatings that left bruises in places clothing would hide. The night her arm had been broken and left to heal wrong because her uncle feared a doctor would ask questions. She told him about Anna's screams echoing through that house, about the iron poker raised high, about the moment she'd known with absolute certainty that staying meant death. Her voice never wavered, even when tears streamed down her cheeks, even when she saw her uncle's face turning purple with rage across the room. When she finished, Judge Hartwell was silent for a long moment. These are serious allegations, Miss Garrett. Do you have any physical evidence to support them? Lucy stood and turned her back to the courtroom. With shaking hands, she pulled up her sleeve, revealing the crooked angle of her left arm where the bone had healed improperly. Then she gestured to Anna. Anna rose from her seat beside Ruth Carson and walked forward. At the judge's nod, Ruth helped her turn around and lift her dress just enough to reveal her back. The courtroom gasped collectively. Anna's back was a map of scars. Some old and white, some newer and still pink. Crisscrossing her skin in brutal testimony to years of violence. Judge Hartwell's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his gavel. Cover the child, he said quietly, and Ruth quickly helped Anna back into her dress. The judge's gaze moved to Garrett, who sat rigid in his chair, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Mr. Garrett, the judge said, his tone like iron. Do you deny inflicting these injuries? Garrett's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, as I stated before, guardians have the legal right to discipline their wards. My client may have been stern, but he was within his rights. I asked your client, counselor, not you. Judge Hartwell interrupted coldly. He looked directly at Garrett. Answer the question. Did you do this? Garrett stood, his face flushed, his voice defensive. They needed discipline. They were wild, disobedient. Their father spoiled them, and when he died, someone had to teach them proper behavior. By breaking bones and leaving scars? The judge's voice cut like a blade. By locking children in cellars without food? Garrett's composure cracked. They're my wards. The law says they're mine to raise as I see fit. What I do in my own home is my business. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Hartwell struck his gavel hard. Order. This court will have order. When silence returned, he leaned forward, his gaze boring into Garrett. The law does indeed give you guardianship, Mr. Garrett, but it does not give you ownership. Children are not property to be beaten at will. He turned to Marshal Carson. Do you have additional testimony? Carson nodded and called Chayton forward. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom as the Comanche hunter walked to the witness chair, his bearing dignified despite the hostile stares from several townspeople. Judge Hartwell studied him with interest. State your name for the record, the judge said. Chayton, he answered simply. No family name? Chayton's expression was unreadable. My family is gone. The name is enough. Judge Hartwell nodded slowly. Marshal Carson says you sheltered these children. Tell me what you witnessed. Chayton's testimony was measured and precise. He described the night Lucy and Anna had appeared at his door, their condition, their terror. He spoke of their injuries, their bloodied feet, their hollow eyes. He told of the hunters who'd come demanding entry and how he'd sent them away. His voice never rose, never became emotional, but the truth in his words was undeniable. These children were not running from discipline, Chayton said, his dark eyes fixed on the judge. They were running for their lives. I've seen fear before, Your Honor. I've seen it in animals caught in traps, in my own people when soldiers came to drive us from our lands. The fear in those girls' eyes that night was the fear of prey being hunted by something that means to kill it. Garrett's lawyer jumped up. Objection, Your Honor. This witness is hardly qualified to. Sit down, Counselor, Judge Hartwell said without looking at him. His attention remained on Chayton. You risked your own safety to protect these children. Why? Chayton was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because my daughter would have been their age now, he said finally. Because I know what it is to lose a child, and I would not stand by and watch 2 more children be destroyed by cruelty. Because kindness is not something you show only to your own people. It's something you show to anyone who needs it, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The courtroom was silent. Even Garrett's lawyer seemed at a loss for words. Judge Hartwell leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Thank you for your testimony. You may step down. Chayton returned to his seat beside Lucy, and she saw something in the judge's eyes that gave her hope. Judge Hartwell looked at Garrett's lawyer. Do you have any further testimony to present? The lawyer stood, clearly grasping for anything that might salvage his case. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that his discipline may have been harsh, but he was acting in what he believed were the children's best interests. He's willing to modify his approach if the court sees fit to return them to his custody. Modify his approach, Judge Hartwell repeated, his tone dangerously quiet. As though breaking a child's arm is merely an approach that needs adjusting. He stood, and the entire courtroom rose with him. I've heard enough. I'm ready to render my decision. Lucy's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Anna gripped her hand tightly. Across the room, Garrett leaned forward, his expression a mixture of confidence and rage. Judge Hartwell looked at each of them in turn before speaking. The evidence presented here today is clear and compelling. These children bear physical scars that tell a story no amount of legal paperwork can refute. Mr. Garrett, your testimony revealed not remorse but justification. Not concern for these children's welfare, but resentment at having your authority questioned. The judge's voice grew harder with each word. The law does indeed grant guardians broad authority to discipline their wards. But that authority is not absolute, and it does not extend to brutality. What you have done to these children is not discipline. It is torture. Garrett started to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. Therefore, I hereby terminate your guardianship effective immediately. You are stripped of all legal rights and responsibilities regarding Lucy and Anna Garrett. The courtroom erupted. Garrett shot to his feet, his face apoplectic. You can't do this. They're mine by law. Their father made me their guardian. Judge Hartwell struck his gavel repeatedly. I can and I have. My ruling is final. Furthermore, I'm ordering Marshal Carson to investigate whether criminal charges should be filed against you for assault and child endangerment. If you're wise, Mr. Garrett, you'll leave this town quietly and pray that I don't decide to have you arrested." Garrett's lawyer grabbed his arm, trying to pull him toward the door, but Garrett shook him off. His eyes found Lucy across the courtroom, and the hatred in them was so pure it made her step back. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll pay for this, both of you. I'll make sure of it." "Mr. Garrett, you are now threatening children in my courtroom," Judge Hartwell said icily. "Marshal Carson, escort this man out. If he resists or makes any further threats, arrest him." Carson and his deputies moved forward, and Garrett finally seemed to realize he'd lost. With a final venomous look at Lucy, he allowed himself to be led from the courthouse. When the door closed behind him, Lucy felt her legs give out. She sank into her chair, Anna collapsing against her, both of them shaking with relief so intense it bordered on hysteria. Ruth Carson rushed over, gathering them both into her arms, murmuring comfort and reassurance. Judge Hartwell wasn't finished. "Now then, we must address the matter of these children's future guardianship. They cannot remain in Marshal Carson's custody indefinitely." He looked at Lucy and Anna. "Do you have any other family who might take you in?" Lucy shook her head, her voice hoarse. "No one, Your Honor. Our mother's family disowned her when she married our father. And our father's only brother was—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The judge nodded in understanding. "I see. Then we must find suitable placement elsewhere." Ruth Carson stood, still holding Anna close. She looked at her husband, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, if it please the court, my husband and I would like to petition for guardianship." The courtroom fell silent once more. Marshal Carson rose to stand beside his wife, his hand resting on Lucy's shoulder. "We have no children of our own, Your Honor. We've always wanted them, but God had other plans. Or perhaps this was his plan all along. These girls have been through hell, and they deserve a home where they'll be safe and loved. We'd like to give them that home." Lucy looked up at them in shock, unable to process what she was hearing. Anna's eyes filled with tears. Judge Hartwell studied the Carsons thoughtfully. "This is highly irregular. Guardianship arrangements typically require time for investigation and approval." "I understand, Your Honor," Carson said. "But these children need stability now, not months from now, while bureaucracy runs its course. You know me, know my reputation in this town. You know my wife. We're not asking to adopt them tomorrow. We're asking for temporary guardianship while you conduct whatever investigation you deem necessary." Judge Hartwell was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Lucy. "Miss Garrett, you're old enough to have some say in this matter. How do you feel about the marshal and his wife becoming your guardians?" Lucy tried to speak but found her throat too tight with emotion. She looked at Ruth, who'd cared for them with such gentleness. At Marshal Carson, who'd protected them without hesitation. At the home they'd offered, the safety, the kindness. "Yes," she finally managed. "Please, yes." Judge Hartwell nodded. "And you, Miss Anna?" Anna didn't even try to speak. She just nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face. The judge allowed himself a small smile, the first warmth Lucy had seen from him. "Very well. I hereby grant temporary guardianship to Marshal William Carson and his wife Ruth, pending a full investigation to be completed within 3 months. At that time, we'll reconvene to determine whether to make the arrangement permanent." He struck his gavel. "This hearing is adjourned." The courtroom erupted in conversation as people filed out. Lucy and Anna found themselves surrounded by well-wishers, townspeople they'd never met offering congratulations and support. But Lucy's eyes sought out Chayton, who stood apart from the crowd near the back of the room. She pushed through the people and threw her arms around him, not caring about propriety or the stares they drew. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. Thank you for everything." Chayton's arms came up to hold her gently. When she pulled back, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a lightness, as though some burden had been lifted. "You're going to be all right now," he said softly. "Both of you." Anna joined them, hugging Chayton fiercely. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Will you stay in Fort Griffin?" Chayton shook his head. "This isn't my home, little one. My home is in the hills, in the forest where my family rests. But I'll visit when I can. And if you ever need me, you'll know where to find me." Marshal Carson approached, extending his hand to Chayton once more. "I meant what I said about being grateful. You gave those girls their lives back. If there's ever anything I can do for you, anything at all, you just ask." Chayton shook his hand. "Keep them safe. That's all I ask. Keep them safe and let them know kindness, so they grow up understanding that the world has light in it, not just darkness." "You have my word," Carson said solemnly. Ruth came over with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "I packed you some food for your journey." "It's not much, but..." Chayton took the bundle with a nod of thanks. "It's more than enough. You've given me something more valuable than food. You've given me hope that there's still justice in this world, even if it's hard to find." He looked one last time at Lucy and Anna, his expression tender in a way that reminded Lucy achingly of how her own father used to look at them. "Be strong," he told them. "Be kind. And remember that you survived because you refused to give up. That courage is yours now. Keep it close." Then he turned and walked out of the courthouse, his footsteps silent even on the wooden floor. Lucy and Anna stood in the doorway, watching as he untied his horse from the hitching post and mounted. He looked back once, raising his hand in farewell. Then he rode out of Fort Griffin, heading toward the hills that held his memories and his peace. Lucy felt tears on her cheeks, but also a strange sense of completion. Chayton had helped them find safety, had stood as witness to their truth, had given them the courage to face their demons. Now he was returning to his own life, carrying with him the knowledge that his kindness had mattered, that his daughter's memory lived on in the lives he'd saved. Ruth's arm came around Lucy's shoulders. "Come along, dear. Let's go home." Home. The word settled into Lucy's heart like a key turning in a lock. They walked back to the Carsons' house, and for the first time Lucy allowed herself to truly believe it. This was their home now. These were their guardians. This was their new life. That night, as Lucy lay in bed beside Anna, listening to her sister's peaceful breathing, she thought about everything that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the running, the strangers who'd become saviors. She thought about Martha at the river, about Chayton in his cabin, about the Carsons opening their hearts. All these threads woven together to create a path from darkness into light. The next morning, Lucy woke to the smell of baking bread and fresh coffee. She dressed and went downstairs to find Ruth teaching Anna how to knead dough, both of them laughing at Anna's flour-covered hands. Marshal Carson sat at the table reading a newspaper, and when he saw Lucy, he smiled and gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Morning, Lucy." Ruth made extra biscuits. Lucy sat down, accepting the plate Ruth offered. As she ate, surrounded by warmth and normalcy, she realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not perfect, not without challenges, but safe, kind, built on care rather than control. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Judge Hartwell conducted his investigation, interviewing the Carsons, speaking with townspeople, observing how Lucy and Anna were settling into their new life. When 3 months had passed, he convened another hearing, this one brief and joyful. "Having completed my investigation, I find no reason to deny permanent guardianship to Marshall and Mrs. Carson. They have proven themselves exemplary caregivers, and the children have flourished under their care. Therefore, I hereby grant permanent guardianship, with all the rights and responsibilities therein." His gavel came down with finality. That night, Ruth made a special dinner to celebrate. The table was crowded with food, and with friends who'd come to mark the occasion. As Lucy looked around at the smiling faces, at Anna's joy, at the home they'd found, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, complete and utter peace, months. Later, on a cool autumn morning, Lucy and Anna were helping Ruth in the garden when a familiar figure appeared at the edge of town. Chayton rode slowly down the main street, and when Lucy spotted him, she dropped her trowel and ran, Anna right behind her. He dismounted and caught them both in a hug, and Lucy saw that the haunted look in his eyes had softened. "I had to see how you were doing," he said. "Had to know you were truly safe." They spent the afternoon together, Lucy and Anna telling him about school, about their life with the Carsons, about all the small joys that made up their days. Chayton listened with quiet satisfaction. Before he left, he gave each of them a gift. For Anna, a new carving, a pair of birds in flight. For Lucy, a leather journal. "Write your story," he told her. "Not so you'll remember the pain, but so you'll remember the strength it took to survive it. So others who read it someday will know that darkness doesn't have to win." Lucy clutched the journal to her chest, understanding the weight of what he was giving her. "Will you come back again?" Chayton smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "When the seasons turn and the world grows cold, I'll come to see how you've grown." "That's a promise." He rode away as the sun set, his silhouette against the orange sky a reminder of all he'd done, all he'd sacrificed, all the quiet courage he'd shown. Lucy stood with Anna, watching until he disappeared from view. Then they turned back toward the house where Ruth was lighting lamps in the windows, where Marshall Carson was closing up the office for the night, where home waited warm and welcoming. Years would pass, and Lucy would indeed write their story. She would become a teacher, dedicating herself to protecting children like she and Anna had been. Anna would grow into a healer, studying medicine and bringing compassion to those who suffered. The Carsons would love them as their own, and they would love in return, and sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind howled outside, Lucy would take out the wooden bear and the leather journal, and she would remember. She would remember the terror and the running, but more importantly, she would remember the kindness. The strangers who'd become family, the hunter who'd loaded his rifle and said stay, the moment when hunted children had found sanctuary and, in finding it, had learned that courage and love could overcome even the darkest of circumstances. Their uncle Silas Garrett disappeared into obscurity, his name eventually forgotten by all but a few. But the names of those who'd helped two runaway twins, those names lived on in stories passed down through generations. Martha the river woman, Chayton the hunter, William and Ruth Carson. These were the names that mattered, the names that reminded everyone who heard them that even in the hardest times, there are people who choose kindness over cruelty, who choose to protect rather than harm. And in a cabin far in the hills, Chayton sat by his fire, holding a photograph of his wife and daughter, and for the first time in years, he smiled without pain. Because he'd learned something important too, that love doesn't end when people die. It transforms into action, into choices made on behalf of others, into opening doors when frightened children knock, into standing witness when truth needs defending. The story of Lucy and Anna wasn't just about survival. It was about the power of human decency, about how one act of kindness ripples outward, creating waves that touch lives in ways we can never fully predict. It was about refusing to let cruelty define the world, about building something better. One choice, one moment, one open door at a time. And on a porch in Fort Griffin, two sisters who'd once known only fear now knew peace. Watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Safe at last, loved at last, home at last. Spring had returned to Fort Griffin with a gentleness that seemed impossible after the harshness of the previous year. The town square bustled with activity as families gathered for the annual harvest festival. Children running between vendor stalls while their parents browsed handmade goods and fresh produce. Among the crowd, two girls moved with quiet confidence. No longer the hollow-eyed waifs who'd stumbled into town 12 months before. Lucy was 12 now, taller, her hair neatly braided down her back, wearing a blue dress Ruth had sewn for her birthday. She carried a basket filled with jars of preserves Ruth had taught her to make, heading toward the church booth where they'd be sold to raise money for the new schoolhouse. Beside her, Anna walked with a slight skip in her step, her own basket heavy with fresh bread, her laughter bright and unguarded. Marshal Carson stood near the bandstand, his arm around Ruth's waist as they watched the girls navigate the crowd. Hard to believe they're the same children who arrived here terrified and half-starved, Ruth said softly, pride evident in her voice. Carson nodded, his weathered face softened by a smile that had become more frequent over the past year. They've got good hearts, he said. They just needed someone to give them a chance to show it. The hearing 3 months ago had made their guardianship permanent, and in the time since, the girls had blossomed in ways that still surprised him. Lucy excelled in school, often staying after to help younger children with their reading. Anna had discovered a gift for drawing, her sketches of the town and its people adorning the walls of their home. A commotion at the edge of the square drew everyone's attention. A lone rider approached on a dark horse, and even from a distance, Carson recognized the straight-backed posture and long black hair. Chayton had returned, just as he'd promised when the seasons turned. Lucy spotted him at the same moment and broke into a run. Anna close behind, Chayton dismounted and caught them both, his rare smile appearing as he embraced the girls who'd become something like daughters to him, though he'd never claimed that title out loud. You've grown, he observed, studying their faces. Both of you look healthy, strong. Lucy beamed at him. Ruth feeds us 3 meals a day and makes us drink milk with everyone. Anna complains, but secretly she likes it. I do not, Anna protested, but her grin betrayed her. She pulled the wooden bear from her pocket, its surface smooth from constant handling. I still carry this everywhere. For courage, just like you said. Chayton's expression softened as he touched the small carving. And have you needed much courage this year? Some, Lucy admitted. There was a trial for our old uncle last month. He tried to come back, claimed Judge Hartwell's ruling was invalid. But the judge held firm, and Marshal Carson testified about everything. They're sending him to prison for what he did to us. Her voice was steady, without the tremor that would have been there a year ago. Chayton's eyes found Carson across the square, and the 2 men exchanged nods of mutual respect. Justice, then, Chayton said quietly. The world has a way of balancing itself, given time and good people willing to stand up. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out 2 packages wrapped in soft deerskin. For Lucy, a leather-bound book filled with blank pages, an expansion of the journal he'd given her before. I heard from the marshal that you've been writing, he said. Keep telling your story. Keep reminding the world that survival is possible. For Anna, he presented a set of drawing charcoals wrapped in cloth. The marshal also mentioned your gift for art. These are made from willow, the best for sketching. The girls accepted their gifts with reverence, understanding that Chayton's presents were never casual, always meaningful. Ruth and Carson approached, welcoming Chayton warmly and insisting he stay for supper. We've got a spare room now, Ruth said. No more sleeping under the stars, at least not tonight. Chayton accepted with rare grace. That evening, around a table laden with food and surrounded by laughter, 5 people who'd been brought together by tragedy celebrated what they'd built from its ashes. As darkness fell and Anna grew sleepy, Chayton prepared to take his leave. At the door, Lucy stopped him with a question she'd been holding for months. Do you ever regret it? Opening your door that night? Chayton considered the question seriously, as he did everything. Regret suggests I'd choose differently if given the chance, he said finally. But helping you 2 reminded me that grief doesn't have to end in bitterness. It can transform into purpose. He touched her shoulder gently. My daughter would have liked you both very much." Lucy hugged him fiercely. Inside the warm house, Lucy climbed into bed beside Anna, who was already half asleep. Through the window, she could see stars emerging in the clear night sky. "Lucy?" Anna murmured drowsily. "I'm happy. Is that okay?" Lucy pulled her sister close. "Yes, it's exactly what we fought for." And as sleep claimed them both, two girls who'd once known only how to run finally understood what it meant to stay.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.